I just want to applaud your being here. Here's this quote from Charlotte Mason out of Home Education. And so she's quoting this man that she drew from a lot in her youth. And she says, the training of children, says Mr. Herbert Spencer, physical, moral, and intellectual, is dreadfully defective. And in great measure it is so because parents are devoid of that knowledge by which this training can alone be rightly guided. What is to be expected when one of the most intricate of problems is undertaken by those who have given scarcely a thought to the principle on which its solutions depend? For shoemaking or house building, for the management of a ship or of a locomotive engine, a long apprenticeship is needful. Is it then that the unfolding of a human being in body and mind is so comparatively simple a process that anyone may superintend and regulate it with no preparation whatever? So I think it's just, it is an issue like Becca. So how were you trained in ballet? I mean, you decided you wanted to go into ballet, and what level of training and involvement and did that take?
Just increasingly, as far as time commitment, increasing into it almost daily, for several hours a day, for over 10 years.
Were you just putting on music and dancing yourself? I mean, you chose
to go to the best you can find, the teachers that you can really pull from, and have the standard that is expected for the best.
Right, exactly. If you want to be the best, you find the best mentors, right? And you call forth the best in yourself, and you put yourself under some level of, actually extreme level of tutelage, saying, okay, I'm going to submit myself to what has the fruit of being proven. I can look out there and say, this is a ballet I watched and that was exquisite. That's my goal. That's where we want to go. That's the high product at the end that I'm looking for. And yet in the area of raising children, and like, the wording that she says, the most intricate of problems, right? I mean, the highest thing of molding, unfolding of a human being in body and mind, I mean, she says, is that so just plain Jane and simple that we need no mentors, that we need no standards? I mean, the more that I talk with people who are looking forward to having children, raising children, it just becomes very plain to me that in our culture, we've just almost excised out any level of training for parenting. And even within our families, this is something that I would just commend to you. You guys are taking parenting to a new level, and even in the Christian community, by what you're drawing from how the principles upon which you're working, the philosophy that you're trying to put in place, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you're taking it to a whole new level. And in that, one of the things that you need to be thinking about right at the very beginning of raising a child, and your baby's coming in a few weeks, right? You guys each have children. So when you meet that child, your thought of looking at that child is, of course, all the wonder. But very quickly, you need to have a long-term range of saying, my goal is to be that star ballerina on the stage, right? I know where I want to go. I have got a high goal. What is my high goal? I talk to parents and say, what's your goal in parenting? What do you want your child to be? Well, I don't want him to commit adultery, and I don't want him to steal.
If they went on the streets, homeless, and druggy.
So there are these general things. I don't want him to be this, and I want him to be happy, and I want him to be able to have a family and hold a job and be productive, right? You go, well, good. So does the rest of the world.
Have a good life.
And have a good life.
Such a vague.
So so now we've got a dance team that you go, okay, well, you could dance on the park on Saturday, but are we going for the gold, right? And so the gold really is, well, what I hope we'll talk about this next time, is there's 5 stages of maturity in life. And you have infant, that goes through the age of 3, so up to turning 4. So birth to infant. We'll talk about it more next week too. So, and then you have child, and then you have adult, and then you have parent, and then you have elder. So when you hold this child in your arms and you're nurturing your children through all these years, your goal is to have this child develop into an elder, right? And an elder is, I mean, we'll talk more about it, but essentially an elder is one who sacrifices his life for the well-being of community, for the well-being of the whole community of believers and the kingdom of God, right? So there's levels of maturity that go in there. That, number one, you're going to have to walk first as a parent, because you can't bring your child anywhere you haven't been and anywhere you are not. You can send them and say, oh, do better, and we do part of that as parents. I mean, the whole time in my raising up of our sons, I would, when they were first able to even handle that idea, which was basically pretty young, I would say to them, look, I am following God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, but I'm on a road, right? And I'm going to do some things right, and I'm going to do some things wrong. And whatever I do wrong, when I find out what I'm doing wrong, I'm going to get it in line, right? But I give you permission to watch my life and to look at my life. And I want you to take what matches the scripture and what matches Jesus. And I want you just to bless me and forgive me and let the other stuff go by. Don't pick up that. So I want you to be evaluative in our home. Now, that's a very threatening thing for a parent to do, to give your child, they're going to do it anyway, by the way, be evaluative in your home and, looking for hypocrisies and things. But to bring it right out in the open and say, I want you doing that. I want you looking, because I want you to take the best of what I have to offer you in following Christ. And I want you to know I give you absolute permission to not only not take the other part. You can talk about the other part with other people, and figure out what I'm doing wrong. But I ask you, in the process of our life as a family, would you come to me when you see me doing something not consistent with the high calling of Jesus Christ, not walking out the gospel, not walking out maturity? And so what I told to the boys, I said, listen, if you see me relate to daddy in a way that you look and you go, that was hurtful, that was bad, or that was just wrong, right? I give you permission to come to me and point that out to me. But here's the ground rules. You have to be respectful. You have to be merciful. And you need to be for me and not against me. I mean, you're not going to come and be rude and scream and go, whatever, right? But to come and help me get it right. Right. And you end up having this relationship inside the family. Then when you earn the right to speak into each other's lives, you've given each other that permission. Right. So you're looking to figure out how to be the best possible family, the best possible parent. And to do that, it takes reaching outside of yourself and not just flying by the seat of your pants. I mean, most of us in parenting, let me ask you, what training have you had for being a parent? What would you consider your training to be a parent?
Enculturation.
Huh?
Being
you get trained
surrounded
for
by
birth.
A bunch of ideas, yeah.
You get, there's a lot of training nowadays for birth.
That's true.
A lot of books on how to be pregnant and have a baby, but then nothing for after. It's very strange. That struck me when I was pregnant. Just how there's classes and they teach you the basics of like diapering and breastfeeding, which of course are important, but then when it comes to actually parenting, which you're going to be doing for a much longer amount of time, I'm like, what do I do? Where do I go?
So what we've, kind of default is, what we've been modeled.
Yeah.
what has been modeled to us.
Right.
What you catch, like you catch the measles.
Yeah.
I just do this because this is what grandma and great grandma and mom have done, and this is how I was raised, and I am a product of who I have been. Right? So with that, it's interesting that we're talking now in the area of medicine about preventative medicine. Big switch towards, I don't want to just have to run in and do major surgery on a heart that is now, overwhelmed with cholesterol or something, right? I'm looking back and I'm saying, how do we avoid getting to that point? But in the area of parenting, and even in the area of marriage, we go into marriage counseling when we've got a problem, when we've hit a wall, when things are falling apart, when it's hanging by a thread. And we do the same thing with parenting. What levels of parenting? There's some going on in the Christian community, thank God. There really are some wonderful people to draw from. But it's really not the norm at all for young people to, before you're married, before there's even a taste of having a child, that you're preparing your heart because you have this view of becoming an elder. You have this view of becoming a parent, and you're preparing yourself like you would for the ballet, for the grand performances that you give out of skill. So that's what we want to be doing. And to do that, we have a couple of options. One is that we take the time and the effort and the sweat equity that it takes to learn a philosophy of parenting that is consistent with how God has designed human souls to thrive. Isn't that what we want for our children? I want this little human soul to thrive in spirit, soul, and body, right? We've got that nebulous out there sense that what we want. But without a philosophy, what you're left with are two options. So a philosophy would be having guiding beliefs, firm pillars of understanding, like these pillars right here, right? Holding up this whole section. Everything else happens around it. So the pillars define what the space is going to look like, what's going to happen in the space. You've got these pillars in place. That's your philosophy. So without a philosophy, what you're left with is what most of everybody else does in parenting, which is we make it up on the fly. And we take a little of this and we take a little of that. Oh, I don't know, maybe I should spank. Maybe I should spank a lot. Maybe I should only spank a little bit. Maybe I should do timeouts. Maybe I should, do a lot of explaining to my child. Maybe I should hand him over to grandma and go back to work. Maybe I should, maybe I should put him in school because I don't know what to do with this kid that won't obey me, and probably the teacher will be able to. I mean, we're just scrambling, right, for random approaches to this vast goal that we have. Or that drives us crazy and we try and grab onto a system. We just look around and we go, who's got a system? Like, I came down here in my car, and my car runs on a system. It's got a book in the dashboard. I can take it out and it shows me the system. Turn this knob, this is going to happen. Step on the brake, this is going to happen. This is what's under the engine. It's all on the basis of a system, and the system doesn't change. And I fix by the system and I break by the system, right? But the system is what's absolutely solid. Well, suppose one day I'm saying that's what I want for my parenting. Somebody give me a system, right? And so I know I'm a spanker. I do spank my kids, right? And I'm a timeouter. And I'm a timeouter, and I'm a this and that, right? And so we get a system, down. But you're not dealing with a car. You're dealing with a living human being who is different every moment, every hour, every day, every year of life. Things are living and changing and organic and moving. So it's like trying to use that system manual now to go into a car where now I go to put my foot on the gas, and instead of the gas pillar being under the right foot, it's under the left foot. Oh my God, the system has failed. What do I do, right? I go to turn this. So we gravitate towards a system. When we do that, we end up doing all sorts of things wrong with our children. I mean, we spank when we shouldn't spank. We apply the system when the brake pedal has moved, right? Because it will never stay static. So we don't need techniques. what we need is a philosophy, and what we need in that philosophy are the pillars, the firm pillars of my philosophy. And as a parent, I should be able to articulate those to myself. We should be able to articulate those to each other, and we should be able to articulate them to our children. Because remember, as your child is growing, you're going to be explaining to them how you're parenting, because you are the master trainer of your children. You don't need to look to books or tell your children, here's a book. I mean, you need to be training your children in the philosophy of education that is giving life to them, so that they are equipped to have the next generation, right? And not have to grab onto a system or random. You're establishing the awareness of pillars in them, but you can't establish what you don't know, and you can't establish what you haven't grappled with. And so that's what we're doing, is getting a philosophy of education. And I use the word education and parenting interchangeably, because I'm thinking of education in its broadest sense. Drawing a little human being through the process of growth in life to thrive in wisdom and knowledge and humanity and spirituality and all of that, right? So I go back and forth with that word, and that's how I mean it. I don't mean like math and technicalities of education. Okay. If you have a method now, if you have a philosophy, your philosophy is going to give you not a system, it produces a method. And a method is different than a system. A system is unchangeable and inflexible and mostly won't work with living human beings. A method is very different, because now a method is based upon a principle. And if you have your principles, your pillars, your philosophy in place, your method just falls together. What to do just falls together. All right, I want to start us out helping you think through what your philosophy of parenting is. And I obviously drew much, I would say, if not most, of my philosophy became clear and established through the help of Charlotte Mason. And so her volumes were things that I fed on as a young mom, and they just have helped immensely. And I think I just commend them to you, as something well worthy of your time and your study. So,
were your kids when you were first introduced to her?
Our kids were really pretty young. I'm trying to think of when we first went to Switzerland with Schaefer's. I would say,
I think I was probably 4.
No, you were less than that, because we took Ryan to Switzerland. He was 4.5 months. So Ben, yeah, that's right. Yeah, probably 3, and Ben was you're 7 years. So he was probably 9, 8, 9, in that age range, right? Okay, I want us to read and start coming at your philosophy from what might seem like a negative side or a downer side, but it's very compatible to how Jesus comes at introducing us to our relationship to our children. And so I wanted to start reading. Let me start here. All right. I'm reading out of, again, Home Education, and I want to do this a bit a la Charlotte Mason. I'm just going to read a section, and then we'll say what it says, and then we'll talk about it. We'll develop it from there. All right, so she calls this section a code of education in the Gospels. It may surprise parents who have not given much attention to the subject to discover also a code of education, remember we're saying parenting, in the Gospels, expressly laid down by Christ. So now my ears go up, right? Okay. My antenna go up. It is summed up in 3 commandments, and all 3 have a negative character. as if the chief thing required of grown-up people is that they should do no sort of injury to the children. Take heed that ye offend not, despise not, hinder not one of these little ones. So somebody who has, if you have a Bible, you can use this too. Matthew, we're going to do Matthew 18:6, and then Matthew 18:10 and Matthew 19:14. We'll read those out loud.
Matthew 18:6 first.
Sure.
But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea.
What's the next one?
Yeah, anybody else have a different version of that?
I do. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. That's 18:10.
18:10, okay. And 18:6 was the one that Ian wrote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
18:6 is your. Do you have a
Okay,
different
yeah,
version?
sorry.
18:6. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Maybe that's the same version.
I think so.
Okay. Pick
Do
another
you
one.
want KJV?
Sure.
Those who shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea.
All right. We are not to offend. I mean, there's different ways to whether they translate that word, but essentially it's offend. You're not to offend a child, and it's very serious. I mean, Jesus says, look, you're going to ruin my precious child. And it's very serious. It would be better that you have a big ton of brick tied around your neck and thrown into the ocean if you're going to do this. I mean, this is so near to the heart of God. Don't screw up my kids, right? All right. And don't despise them. That word despise means it can be hate, right? And in our parenting, when you look at the scope and of how people parent, it probably goes somewhere from I hate my kid, but down to just I don't value them enough. I don't value them the way God values them. And we can see in our actions to say when I am valuing them, what I value, I will sacrifice for, right? So don't despise the children. And then what was the next one? Was Matthew 19:14.
But Jesus said, let the children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children.
All right, don't hinder the children from coming to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Now, these verses, when I read this from Charlotte Mason, this became a pillar, probably the very first pillar of parenting for me as a young mom, was realizing, and the way God gave me to say it was, being a parent is like the work of John the Baptist in a child's life. That's how, now I've got my role, I've got my identity. What did John the Baptist do? He was sent before the Lord, right? And it says he was to bring down the mountains, he was to bring up the valleys, and he was to make a straight way for the Lord to walk into that place, right? So that's what I see inside my children's hearts. I mean, I'm looking and I'm going, God, you have me in my children's lives to bring down the resistance, bring up the pitfalls, right? So that there is a straight way, and I am not to be a hindrance in any way. I am not to hinder the children from coming to you. What does that say? We'll talk about spirituality maybe somewhere down the line, drawing how you raise your children in the Lord. But ultimately, Jesus is saying out here, the children will come to me. They from the moment they are conceived, their natural flow is to me, not away from me. Their natural state is openness for me to walk into their heart, not resistance, unless you guys screw them up. Is that okay to use that word? Okay. But unless you guys really mess it up, right? So I was so sobered by this. I thought, you know how And the Hippocratic Oath, one of the strong elements of it is do no harm. I had a nurse friend one time years ago, and I was asking about her job and how she functions, and she said, "Oh, I pray every morning, God, don't let me hurt anybody." I thought, I was so shocked. I thought, that's your prayer. I hope to God you're not my nurse. Like, this is starting way too low. How about help and get her out, the hospital or something bigger, But for years that troubled me. I thought, really? That's your highest goal? Don't kill anybody, don't hurt anybody, I mean, that's just sort of a given that you're not going to kill and hurt. And I thought, for her, she was going, no, it's not. I pray all the time that I would not offend, that I would not despise, essentially what she was saying, right? That I wouldn't hinder the health of, someone growing to health. And so that's kind of my analogy of, my pillar to say, all right, number one of parenting is do no harm. Because if you can just do that, if you never get to the next great steps, but just don't mess them up, your kids are going to be really okay, right? Because they're just drawn to the Lord and God will work it all out. Just don't mess them up. So now when we look at society and we look at our own lives and we look at areas where we resist God and we don't walk in joy and we're not thankful, all this thing, we have been taught that our flesh has, so Charlotte Mason will say, children are born with the potential of good and the potential for evil. The potential is there. She would never be denying the fall at all. I mean, totally denying the fall, but she doesn't elevate the fall to a cult. In other words, to say, I have to look at my child as a dirty, rotten, filthy sinner with an unrepentant heart and just, pray blood, sweat, and tears until they receive Jesus into their heart, right? I mean, no. And as you go along and you read the scriptures, you go, no, that child, yes, is fallen, but Jesus shed his blood. He paid for their sins. They have all the power of heaven on their side to have Jesus walk straight into their heart. Now, when I'm relating to my child, you need to know that you are a God figure to your child. From the moment you hold that child in your arms, you and your spouse are the face and the arms and the hands and the attitude and the perspective, the representation of God to that child. You are big and powerful and you are their provider, right? I mean, you're a God figure to them. And you are that for many years. And in some senses, children, you carry that, you just kind of have to unscramble that, and even in your adult years. But initially in these formative years of your children, that's who you are to your child. So how do I offend a child? How do I despise a child? How do I hinder a child? I need to know what's going on inside of me and how I relate to that child in ways that don't hinder and don't despise and don't offend, right? So that's what I want us to read into a little bit here now. We'll kind of get this out because we know we're in really good shape if we just don't do those three things according to Jesus. He's very firm there. This is what I ask you. The top thing I'm asking you is don't mess up the kids.
Can you talk more about offend?
Yeah.
Like,
we're going to read into here and we'll talk about it. So she says, so run the three educational laws of the New Testament, which, when separately examined, appear to me to cover all the help we can give the children and all the harm we can save them from. That is, whatever is included in training up a child in the way he should go. So she's saying, if you get the hang of this, don't despise, don't offend, don't hinder, right? That not only tells you what not to do, when you're looking and finding out what not to do, the what to do will come so clear, right? So that's what we're going for. Let us look upon these three great laws as prohibitive in order to clear the ground for the consideration of a method of education, parenting, For if we once settle with ourselves what we may not do, we are greatly helped to see what we may do and must do. But as a matter of fact, the positive is included in the negative. What we are bound to do for the child and what we are, what we are bound to do for the child and what we are forbidden to do to his hurt. All right. Any other comments you want to make about that before we're going to go right into offend? If you want to add a couple of other verses there to read when you get home, Colossians 3:21, these are Paul talking about offending and pretty much uses a little bit different terminology, but it's very powerful. Colossians 3:21, Ephesians 6:4 in the NASB. All right, offenses. She's talking about offending the children now. The first and second of the divine edicts. Now, when we talk about a divine edict, something from Jesus, we go, I know this is a pillar, right? So what I'm commending to you as we talk and we go on with this, get your philosophy down so that you know this is my pillar, right? So you might not put the same pillars in there that I'm putting in there, but be able to put down on paper, be able to articulate between you and your husband, what are your pillars? Okay. So for me, this is a pillar. I think comes right out of the mouth of Jesus. This is a pillar. So she said the first and second of the divine edict, which was, do not offend and don't despise, right? It appears to include our sins of commission, what we do, and our sins of omission against the children. We offend them when we do by them that which we ought not to have done. So when I offend a child, I have done something to that child I should not have done. Right? We despise them when we leave undone those things for their sakes we ought to have done. Now, I would, as a parent, when I am sitting tired doing something and I hear my children squabbling, fighting, I would not have said for me to close my ears to that squabble to say, I probably should get up and intervene. They're learning wrong habits. They're establishing wrong traits. I am tired. Let them work it out. If they bleed, call me, right? So, we all get that way. But I would not have said to myself, I'm despising my children. But in that act, I am despising my children. I need to weigh it on a scale from 1 to 10. But ultimately, what I don't do to help my child shape godly behavior, I am valuing them less than Christ values them. Does that make sense? That's a heavy one to own. But I'm telling you, if you don't own it, it's a sad state. We have to be able to say God has given us responsibility to intervene and to shape our children's lives. And when we choose not to, for whatever reason, and some might be wholly justified, at a point in time, I'm sick as a dog and I can't get out of bed or, something, right? But ultimately, I have to hold myself to that standard to say what I don't do in actively shaping the life of my child for good is despising my child. I am valuing them less than God values them. That's a heavy thing, but it's very true and very helpful. An offense, we know, is literally a stumbling block, that which trips up the walker and causes him to fall. Mothers know what it is to clear the floor of every obstacle when a baby takes his unsteady little runs from chair to chair, from one pair of loving arms to another. The table leg, the child's toy on the floor, which has caused a fall and a pitiful cry, is a thing to be deplored. Why did not somebody put it out of the way so that the baby should not stumble? But the little child is going out into the world with uncertain, tottering steps in many directions. There are causes of stumbling, not so easy to remove as an offending stool, and woe to him who causes the child to fall. So, what what things come to mind? Just parent-child relationships that you could say in an interaction with a child could fall under this category of offending a child, causing the child to fall. So what do we mean by fall? We're talking about not fall physically, right? We're talking about their heart go lower, away from righteousness, away from Christ, away from wholeness and health and vibrancy of abundant life, falling from that, going lower versus going higher.
I'm just reminded of that verse where Paul tells fathers, don't frustrate your children.
It's one of those verses I gave you, don't exasperate.
Yeah, don't exasperate your children, right? And one of those things that I see, and we saw this a lot when we were doing the greenhouse, was parents who had such a totally flexible standard of what was acceptable behavior based on what was happening. I mean, like, I remember one time we had a girl that was asking her mom if she could do a sleepover, and she was just throwing she was putting the screws on 110%. Mom, please, I want to. And mom was, no, not tonight, honey. You know, I'm tired. And then it was like the little girl just went 150% and just throwing tantrums, screaming, yelling. And then mom was like, okay. And I was like, that is a stumbling block for your child. Because you talk about causing them to live in a total state of frustration all the time because they never know that anything is really a solid boundary, that really you mean what you say, because then literally any advice or any boundary you lay for them, they're constantly thinking, but if I push hard enough and I make enough of a fuss and I make it uncomfortable enough for her, it's okay and I'll get what I want. And that to me is a huge stumbling block for a little child to think that might makes right in the most terrible kind of way like that.
So great example. And it fits into kind of where she's going here too. Anything else you would
Well, Ben and we were just talking yesterday, and it kind of falls into that category with Maddie, but she started this thing where she screams when she doesn't want to be playing on her own. She wants to be in the kitchen, but the problem with bringing her in the kitchen when I'm cooking is that there's things that we cannot baby proof because our kitchen is just so old, and so she'll get into the Tupperware drawer. So the Tupperware drawer is kind of this inconsistent thing for her. Sometimes I'm like, just let her play, I can get done with dinner, and she won't scream and drive me batty, and then on the other hand, sometimes I'm like, no, you can't play in that. So Ben and I were just talking about this yesterday, and I said, we have to be consistent. It can't be one day I can play in the Tupperware drawer and the other day I can't, or she's just going to have like a total, it's not going to make sense to
neurotic,
her. And so anyway, it's just like, it's a good realization of just going, okay, well, that's not going to work. And I don't know what's going to work to help with screaming, but that's just going to be more detrimental than beneficial in the long run. So.
And the offense is what you're building into the heart of a child. You are putting a mountain up or a big hole in the road for the righteousness of Christ to walk into this child's heart, because now there's a conflict inside of the child between what's right, what's wrong, what's profitable, what's unprofitable, what's socially acceptable, what's not socially acceptable, what is the good way that community functions and the way, the bad way that community, it's all, now it's just a bumpy road, right?
I was thinking too of, just not teaching your children from God's word and from His, just straight from Him. That what is right and what is godly, what is good that He has set in place in the world. Because if you leave it up to them to choose from every philosophy that's out there, or every belief system that's out there, then it's it is that picture of that there are many, many mountains in front of you, or many little pitfalls, and you're just kind of leaving the child to try to pick through it themselves.
So
the other thing about that is, I think that if you give the impression to a child that your instructions are arbitrary simply based on how you feel at a given time of day, like whether you want to or don't want to, or you had a rough day and so you just like kind of let them do things that they wouldn't normally be okay or whatever, that they're getting ingrained in their heart and their soul that God's instructions to me are arbitrary based on how he feels
There you go.
at a given time
There
of the
you
day,
go.
whether he's happy or sad or mad or glad or whatever, instead of God's instructions for me are always for my good, right? They're always for my betterment.
And for the good of the community.
Yes, right.
Because that is so important. I can't tell you how important this is. What you're doing, your family is a microcosm of the world. Your family is the microcosm of a nation. Your family is the microcosm of a city, a state, a city. Your family is the microcosm of a community, right? So you're just like a cell that has everything inside of it that the world has out there, that a broader community has. So how goes the family, goes the world. I mean, that's a very typical statement, but why is that true? Because your family, the dynamic inside that family is a microcosm of the world, of life, and in the fullest sense. So the very first thing when that child comes in to your arms, here's what changes. And this is what I've taught to my children about marriage. And now you have to teach this to your children, right? Is that when you are single, you are one person, your life is about you, you get to choose your values, choose, your personality, how you live inside of yourself with your thoughts and all of that. You're pretty much, you're single. You decide to get married. Life happens. You can't have, Jesus says, when you die, you fall into the ground and die. Now something new is born, right? You're born new. Your old self dies. You are born new in Christ. That is a pattern that happens in life going through now inside your family. So you decide to get married. I said to my sons, are you ready to die yourself? Are you ready to die to that self? That part of your life now will die, and you will be born a new person, one flesh with another person. So now you are two cells as one. You're one being, but it's not the same. You're not who you were before. That woman is not who she was before. You are now Ian Kimberly, Becca James, right? That's your identity. Okay, so now what happens when you have a child? Most people talk about their children as if they're add-ons. They're add-ons to it's like, it's James and me and the kids, right? Mm-hmm. So James and I get to make the decisions. We're the ones who kind of live the life, and then it's the kids. And I think that is not a biblical pattern, and it really does not serve well. What happens is every time you have a child, old things pass away, new things are born. So it was Jan, then it was Jan Dick, one person. Then it was Jan Dick Ben, one person. And we had that identity. So we're one, right? Then with each child, it just gets hyphenated. You're one person. I don't know if you can get your head around that, but if you can, it's a huge thing. So what are you teaching your children? You're teaching your children from the moment they're born. They have been born into a community. They're not just learning to live life for themselves. They'll be stuck at the child level stage of maturity, right? The infant level, really, they'll be stuck there. So immediately you're thinking all the ways, and we talk about that. Well, you need to learn to share. You need to learn to whatever. Well, yes, and obey and move joyfully in line with the rules of the community, how we live our life together. We all make dinner, we all serve, we all clean up, we all, get in the car happily, we all do. Why? Because that how we teach children to live joyfully within the family is what they're going to carry out into the rest of the world. I mean, look at the world. We have broken down at the level of the family. Everybody living at less than the level of infancy, when you actually think about it. So when you talk about Maddie, right, we have to decide now as a family, what are our rules of community here, right? And then, so we're going to eat at the table and nobody is going to be destructive of, the time that we have that's about community being as a family. So one child, even if it's a baby, doesn't get the right to scream and destroy the whole ability for anybody to communicate. That, just happens. So children are learning that. And if we're not doing that, we are despising the children, and in ways that we're making them herky-jerky inside their soul. Do I obey mom? Do I not obey my mom? What is obey? Is it today? Is it tomorrow? All of that. Now I've offended them, right? And that's, so you're praying every day of your life, like that nurse, don't let me kill anybody today, or, a doctor going, do no harm, right? I mean, I so much of the time I would pray, God, give me the grace to do the work of John the Baptist in my children's lives, that I'm bringing down mountains, bringing up valleys, and I'm not pushing up any and, dipping down anywhere in the soul of my child, how their soul is formulated. Okay.
I think there's also a flip side, like you talked about, viewing the child as an add-on. I think there's also the opposite of that, which is the child becomes the center of the universe.
Yes.
And
child worship.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a total flip side, but it has another, again, because it's not the one thing. It's like, okay, now it's all about you, and everything centers around that child, and I can see that as
exactly.
a real as well.
Put your children in the center of the room. It's like everybody does their whole life in the nursery, in a sense. The whole home is a nursery, and we all now have to do life in a nursery. And you're going, that is not good for the soul of that child. Here is a point that if you get this, your philosophy of parenting cannot be, I run our home and interact with my child and require of my child based on what I can tolerate. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
So everybody has a different tolerance level for all sorts of behaviors. How much we let a child talk back, how much whining, how much screaming, how much chaos, how much selfishness, how much sulking, how much whatever. We know those are the negative behaviors, right? And everybody is on a scale from 1 to 10. You don't parent on the basis of your personality. You don't parent on the basis of what you can tolerate. That will destroy your children and destroy your family. You parent because you're under the authority of God. And he tells you what is right and what is wrong in the soul of those children. And that's what you do. You do whatever it is that is God's perspective on how to guide the child into a thriving existence. Right? So, one parent, you're trying to have a conversation with a friend, and this little child is coming up going, Mommy, 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 takes the mother's face and turns it, she's trying to talk to her friend and going, this way, this way, this way, pulling on the mother's hair, and she's going, pushing the child away and trying to talk, and the child's like, under her leg, crawling on her back, all this stuff. High tolerance for that kind of behavior. Okay, now parenting is all about you, Mom. You're getting your way because it's in your tolerance vein. Do you understand what I'm saying? Everything that you're doing with your child is defined by your self-centered tolerance level. So are you thinking about what's good for your child? I mean, that's not socially acceptable behavior. What is socially acceptable behavior for a child? what is acceptable, socially acceptable behavior for a child, I will say boldly, is socially acceptable behavior for an adult. Excuse me, where are we going with this child? Are we all trying to, perpetuate 1 and 2 and 5 as far as we can stretch it out into the years? Or are we quickly, like nature has shown us, both in the animal world and in the human world, childhood is a very small period of time, and adulthood is a very long period of time. And we're not to extend childhood, right? We're not to be extending childhood. The moment I look at my child, I'm not seeing a different category of human being. You don't look and say, there's adults and then there's children, a whole new category. No. What you look at and you say, this, and we're going to talk about this one of these times too, in the children is born person, a person as a pillar, right? You're looking and saying, this is a child who is a person and a young, short, inexperienced person becoming an adult. So everything I do in that child's life is building in adult thriving skills, not child thriving skills, adult thriving skills, right? So I cannot then say the philosophy, or even unconsciously have a philosophy of education, philosophy of parenting that says I run our home and interact with our child and expect of my child what I can tolerate. That will do you very, very badly. It has to be you're under authority and you are requiring of your child and guiding your child and setting the parameters for your child of what the Lord says is good for their soul. And I don't care whether you can tolerate a heck of a lot of chaos in your house. Is chaos what God wants in the soul of this child? Then you just better tighten up your ship. I'm sorry. Okay. It's just not. Now you're offending. Now you're putting mountains. Now you're doing that, right? So we have to change who we are. So that business of being under authority is a critical link that you'll hear her mention. So she says, children are born law-abiding. Naughty baby, says mother, and the child's eyes droop, and a flush rises over neck and brow. It's very wonderful, very funny, some people think, and say, naughty baby, when the baby is sweetly good, to amuse themselves with the sight of the infant soul rising visibly before their eyes. But what does it mean, this display of feeling, conscience in the child before any human teaching can have reached him? No less than this, that he is born a law-abiding being with a sense of may and must not, of right and wrong. That is how children are sent into the world with the warning, take heed that you offend not one of these little ones. And this being so, who has not met big girls and boys, the children of right-minded parents, who yet do not know what must means, who are not moved by ought, whose hearts feel no stir at the solemn name of duty, who know no higher rule of life than I want and I don't want, I like and I don't like. Heaven help parents and children when it has come to that. Children are created in the image of God. They're persons created in the image of God. They are happy when they are doing righteousness, when they are doing right. They are miserable when they are doing wrong. They're miserable. A misbehaving child is a miserable, unhappy child. Why? Because they were created for righteousness. And everything inside of them is longing to do the right thing. But there has been a fall, and you need to help them get out from underneath the consequences of the fall and move by the Spirit instead of the flesh, right? So we'll talk more about that principle. But if you if you just understand that children want to do the right thing. And when they're doing the wrong thing, they are looking to the God who is powerful, all knowing, should be able to set everything right, and is their provider. Their flesh may be acting out in front of you, acting like it's fighting, against what you're trying to do to help them thrive, but that's an illusion. Deep down in their heart, that child is crying out to you, going, help me get out of this hellhole of what I'm in. When I am misbehaving, I'm in a hellhole. This does not feel good to me, and it actually makes me more anxious. It makes me more angry. So misbehaving child, when you aren't able to help them structure their behavior in the right way so that it's life-giving and compatible with the community and all of that, there's two things that happen. It breeds great anxiety. An anxious child gets more, all they know is, the same way we get anxious. You just start moving, doing. So you're getting into trouble more, right? The more you get into trouble, it's like this downward swirl down the toilet. So the more anxious you get, you just go, you're doing more and more wrong things. You got this train, up and running for a train wreck, right? So this child in the misbehaving is, in these early years, is looking to you going, you're God, help me stop. That's what every little child, if you can look and see defiance and you say, oh, this child has such a strong will. No, this child doesn't have any will at all. They're out of control of their will. That's why. So we use that wrong. They don't have a strong will. Charlotte Mason talks about this. A strong-willed child is one who can look at the no and say, you said no? Okay. I'm creative enough. I can find these other things to do. I can peacefully accept no. That's a child with a strong will. A child with no will at all will go, yeah, I will go to this party and you will let me go, right? And that's a child's soul that's crying out and saying, please say no, because this feels like hell to be in charge. And, life is out of order. I don't want it to be out of order, and I don't want to be in charge when I'm not supposed to be in charge. So see that instead of defiance. If we see the defiance, we just get into the, oh, I got to push back, and they're trying to control, and they're, now we're in a whole different sphere. Satan's got you in a world that it's an alter virtual reality where the real game is not even being played. So any thoughts or comments about that?
Just brings up thoughts about how Charlotte Mason talks about supporting the child's weaknesses. And I personally have had such a shift happen where I am starting to be able to see that misbehaving stuff as weakness instead of an offense to me, I go take it personally. That no, this is just a weakness that I need to address, and actually support.
And so what's the response out of that? So you have a misbehaving child, like maybe they're, you take something away that they wanted because they're not to play with it, and they do their little, whatever form of tantrum that they, how do you support them in that weakness? Do you just let them have their tantrum and move on? And then they'll come around and start playing again, or is there a coaching process in that?
I'm curious. I'm curious about that too, because I'm thinking about this in terms of my relationship with God, as the ultimate parent and father, and see, like, I would see if God was in that situation and He took something away from me that I'm not to play with, and if I started to throw a tantrum, obviously, what's in His heart toward me is what He says in I think it's John 15 and in 1 John through the Apostle John, where it says, all these words I've spoken to you so that your joy may be full, right? His every command for me is that I may have joy. So His desire is for me to make a change immediately to joy, right? From playing with something that I'm not to play with. It would be ideal for me to have the ability, through His Spirit in me, to make that change into joy right away without the tantrum in between. But if I were to, be in that state of tantrum, the only way that I would stay in that is if it was outright defiance, right, to the transition to joy, just a flat out like, no, I will not be joyful, right? I will not make this transition. But he's done everything possible to allow me, to give me the alternative, to place it in front of me, and to help me see I can make that change. I don't know if that makes sense. But
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done that with little babies, and I continue to do it with young children. Just
husbands.
try. I wasn't thinking about that.
Okay.
Trying to transition to joy.
Yeah. There's a better way here,
Yeah.
and offering that and simple, simple with babies, because you want to establish that feeling of, oh, mom could give me a better way,
Right.
when there's a no, there's a better yes,
Yes.
and there's a joyfulness, and you can swap out the item or the environment or something, to where it's a yes environment and it's joyful.
Good insights. I would say too that you have 3 models from God. Number one, at the most I don't know what level, simple level, or how you describe this, but the point of distracting. It's all right with young children to, if they're obsessed with something that they're not supposed to be doing, is to get them involved in something else, to change their orientation. That's the first entry level. Can I change this child's orientation? I don't want them playing with grandma's good vase, but here's a ball and we can play with it over here, right? So you do the reorientation or the distraction. That's your first entry level. If you have a child that then just yanks their hand out of yours and comes back and I want the vase, I want the vase, I want the vase, right? And you're going back to that. You have discipline. I mean, there's a point at which, and now within your philosophy of what the pillars that you have established for what you can do and what you cannot do with your child, right? You're going to have a method I call tools in the toolbox, right? Your philosophy, excuse me, will give you a rich and full and endless toolbox of ways to come at problems. I mean, God does not run out of ideas to run the universe and interact with all of life, right? So in that regard, you have this child now whose their flesh is rising up. Their spirit is saying, oh, please don't let my flesh rule here. Please don't let my flesh rule, because their spirit is calling out for righteousness. Don't offend the child. Don't despise the child, right? So don't let their flesh rule there. You're doing them a favor. Parents look on and go, oh, so go ahead and scream. Go ahead and whatever. No, now we're parenting by our tolerance level, right? You don't have a right to do that because you're a parent under authority yourself. That's so important. We'll come back to it over and over and over again, because your child will obey you. They will sense, they'll smell it. They would just feel it, discern it. My mother probably would like to just walk away and have a cup of coffee and let me tear this room apart, but she won't, because she always stands for what's right. Then they know, when you can explain it to them, the reason I stand for what's right, the reason I cannot let you do this is because God doesn't let me do that. Right? I mean, so I am under authority. I mean, we have to do what's right, what we ought, right? Not just what we will. I mean, you're talking to your child, even their early years, not toddlers, but as they have language and all, right? So you do discipline. And if within your philosophy, spanking is an option, for me, did I spank my children? Yes. All of them did not need to be spanked much, and some almost none at all, right? But it always crossed the line of defiance. In other words, a child should not be able to look the mother in the face or the father in the face when you have said, not as an option, it's not, would you like this or would you like that? You're giving them a choice. They should be able to say, no, not that, this, right? Good. That's in the parameters of what was set up. If you say to them, this is not going to happen, or this is not an option for you, or you must, or you give them a direct order and a very clear direction that doesn't have options, then the child looks you in the face and goes, no, and grabs it, or no, and I won't, or, we're leaving now. No, those things where the child looks straight in the face of the parent in defiance, that to me deserves or has earned and requires a bit of physical discipline. And you don't necessarily even have to stop there, but if there is not a correction, like being able to say, I think you know better, would you like to change your response? Just grace. You don't show any flustering. I think you know better than that. Would you like to change your response? And that kid just little flesh locks down and goes, I don't want to go home. I want to stay and play with my friends or something, right? Now you're going and saying, but that wasn't the option mommy gave you. And you cannot say no when I give you a direction, right? Now, don't go overboard and give your kids directions all the time, because now you fall in, do not exasperate your children, right? So you're not running this tight ship of making, how much can I make my kid do without ever defying me? Life should be lovely, right? But there are these times that child needs to know without a shadow of a doubt, when I get this direction from my mom, I can peacefully, or my dad, I can peacefully receive that and move in that direction. That comes into the infant stage of learning to peacefully accept no. What is peacefully accept no? I can't have my way. No. You want to stay? No. Right? So peacefully accept no. Now you are building the character of Christ in them, because they have the creativity inside of themselves to be able to find joy. Okay, well, I have to go, but I've got my little car in my pocket, and I'll sing a little song, and I've got other things to do to make life joyful besides playing with Joey, right? I can't have Joey, so life is still good for me. So you're building that kind of skill into your child. So you have distraction or reorientation. You have discipline when it needs to be done, right? And that might be for defiance, or discipline would have a bigger sense of what are the methods that I have available to me to get this child to move in the right direction. And then you have, this is huge, and most parents forget it, don't do it. You have training. It says train up a child in the way that child is bent. We know that bent should go. That's bent. He's bent towards righteousness. So train him in righteousness. So you have a child maybe who doesn't want to give you toys, little toddlers, right? So play little games in unstressed situations. They're playing with the toy and you go, okay, can you give that to mommy now, right? And then you take it and you hide it behind your back and you're going, oh, it's all gone. But here, you want this one? And they have, you have a toy and you go, oh, mommy's got a toy. Would you like this toy? And you go, here. Now you give the toy to mommy. Mommy does the whatever, right? And so you're playing in a non-stressed environment, sort of give and take, knowing that if they give you something, they don't suffer great loss. Life is still enjoyable. It's just conditioned into their little mind to know. So whatever it is that you've run into a problem, now you're going to go, how in a non-stressed way, out of the context of the tussle that was going on in some neutral time, I've got it in the back of my mind that I'm going to train to this. I'm going to train how fast we can get our shoes on to get in the car. And we're going to do it as a game, right? Then when the real war happens, we got to get out and get out the door. We've practiced that. We've trained it, right?
Yeah, or remember Andrew Womack talking about his son wandering, away from him and being at the point of going into the street or something like that. And if at that point you haven't trained them to immediately respond to your voice and obey, you're literally putting that child's life at
Talk
risk.
about offend and despise.
Talk about offend or despise. It is wrong to and dangerous even to train up a child to sort of not pay attention to you, because at that point their life could be at risk. And I remember his telling a couple different stories about that, where even at couple years old, I think one of his kids had wandered really far ahead of him on a country road or something like that, there was almost never any traffic out there at all, and suddenly there was this car out there, and his kid is now, 50 feet in front of him or something,
Yeah.
and he can't make it there fast enough, and he had to yell at him, stop and
Yeah.
turn around and come back here, right?
Right.
And the kid immediately did, but probably because how many times has he been encouraged through positive reinforcement in playing games and things to come to dad, to hear my voice, to come when you hear me, things.
We're
like
going to
that.
play the stop and drop, or we're going to play the something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a grand tool with children, and I mean at all levels, at all levels. So we started a little bit late. Do you guys have 15 minutes to go through? Or do you have to go? Okay, all right. Let me just read this part right here. So she goes on, she says, but how has it been brought about that the babe with an acute sense of right and wrong, even when it can understand little of human speech, should grow into the boy or girl already proving the curse of the lawless heart? So it's very much like when we do the presentation on the school, there's this picture of this delight. We did it in Power Search and Reach with your kids. They probably remember it. Of, this pictures of these beautiful, adorable little babies. And then, this picture of this hard, crusty kid standing on a street corner smoking a cigarette, hanging around with a girl who's, half dressed kind of thing. You go, how did we get from here to there, right? You get those vivid images in your mind. So that's what she's asking here. How does this child with this acute sense of right and wrong, right? It's because we offend, we despise, we hinder, right? So she says, by slow degrees, here a little, there a little, as all that is good or bad in character comes to pass. Naughty, says the mother again, when a little hand is thrust into the sugar bowl, and a pair of roguish eyes seeks her furtively to measure, as they do unerringly, how far the little pilferer may go. It is very amusing. The mother cannot help laughing, and the little trespass is allowed to pass. And what the poor mother has not thought of an offense, a cause of stumbling, has been cast into the path of her 2-year-old child. He has learned already that which is naughty may yet be done with impunity, and he goes on improving his knowledge. It is needless to continue. Everybody knows the steps by which the mother's no comes to be disregarded by her, and she goes on and describes that. Let me just make this one point, and we'll end here. One of the greatest hindrances to successful, joy-filled parenting is the acceptance. You know how Charlotte Mason says the greatest responsibility for any child that they must come to learn is that their greatest responsibility is the acceptance or rejection of initial ideas. That's so true for all of us. So let me tell you an initial idea that all of society has accepted, which should have been rejected. And that is this cult of stages of children. It is a cult. It literally is a cult. It's the terrible twos, and then it's the tremendous threes, and then it's the ferocious fours, and then it's the more than the ferocious fives, and then it's the adolescents, right? So one of the mentors that I saw in my early years that I looked at and I said, okay, there's the ballerina dancing the way I want to dance, right? She's on the stage. I'm going, okay, so this was Susan Schaefer Macaulay, Francis and Edith Schaefer's daughter, right? And I heard her say, when I had children, I looked around at what was going on. And she said, I just said, I don't want to have adolescents. It's horrible. So she said, Randall and I just looked at each other and said, we will have children and then we will have adults. We're not going to have adolescents. Mm-hmm. And I heard her say that, and she said, and we didn't, And so right when I was there, I said to myself, I don't want to have adolescents. I will have children and I will have adults. And I did, 4 of them, right? We didn't have the adolescence. Did we not have all, growth curve things? Yes. But all the stuff that people say characterize. Did we have terrible twos? We didn't have terrible twos. You have terrible twos if you believe they're there, because it's the thing that leads you in to offend and hinder and despise your children more than anything. Because you look at it and say, that temper tantrum is normal. That talking back is their differentiating self at the age of 4. You go, get a grip, throw that garbage out. The only thing that the wisdom of that psychology gets you is maybe a little inkling of when that issue of flesh or sin might tend to manifest itself in the growth process. Thank you. I appreciate knowing that I need to start working with my child about this time in this area that the typical offending behavior tends to come up in the process of growth. Does that make sense? But to say that there is a stage is to say, well, now I just have to say temper tantrums are normal, so I tolerate them. And you will never help a child eliminate in their behavior what you can tolerate. Tolerate is not a biblical word, and it's not a word that serves you as a parent. It has nothing to do with parenting. So rejecting the stages and then going for what it is that God says is godly. It's not godly for a 2-year-old to throw a temper tantrum. It's not godly for a 25-year-old to throw a temper tantrum. It's not godly for people, right? All right, let's pray. Father, I ask this morning, Lord, that you would bring in the door those you've called, that you would give everyone their takeaways, everyone their living thoughts today out of our discussion and out of drawing from our mentor, Charlotte Mason, and from you, God. Charlotte Mason was a woman under authority. She was a woman under Jesus. And so the only reason she's valuable is because she knows your heart and she has your wisdom, and she can help us grab hold of it. And so, Father, I pray that something of today's discussion will be living thoughts, seeds planted in the heart of each family represented here, that will grow up into righteousness. God, we ask you for the grace to do the job of John the Baptist as parents in our children's lives, that we would never put up mountains and drop down pitfalls and holes in front of them, Lord, that makes your job walking into their life harder. God, I don't want anything about my life. These people here don't want anything about their lives to obscure your approach to their children, God. If we don't hinder them, they will come to you. If we don't despise them, if we don't offend them, Lord, you have your beautiful way of drawing them into all life and all truth. God, may we be truly do the job of John the Baptist with our children. And we thank you for the grace to do it. You are a good God. You hold us by your righteous right hand. You give us all wisdom, knowledge, understanding, discernment, and you give us sensitive, obedient hearts. And that's how we parent our children. In Jesus' name.